about the latest happenings in the tax and business world. And, just a quick conversation where I hope you guys can sit back, relax, and, keep up to date with things. So today is May 1st, 2026, and it's actually been a pretty big week in the tax and business world that we want to go over two stories today. And, well, without further ado, let me pour my actual tea here because I know it says coffee break, but I'm a tea guy. So today is Earl Grey, organic or Earl Grey, and with a little shot of stevia as my drink of choice. So that's what I have here today. All right, so let's assume that I can do this without breaking anything on the technical side, which is, always debatable. Let's see, share. I go to screen, and I go to the window, this one, share there. Let's make sure the layout is right. Still have my face on there. Yeah, I got to get into frame, but there we go. Okay, so the first major story that was making the rounds, and this was on Tuesday, I think, or maybe it was Wednesday, where there was reignited coverage of Senate 798. And if you haven't heard of this bill before, you will. You will soon. And the reason why, well, we'll get into the reason why. So first, what it is. So the debate over indexing capital gains to inflation reignites. So this has been discussed for at least a decade that I've been aware of. This was proposed in Trump's first term. It did not make it into the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It did not make it into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And yeah, just is one of those things. So what it's about is if you are selling a long-term asset, then you're going to be paying long-term capital gains. Long-term is defined as greater than 1 year. And so um, if you are selling something that you've held for at least a year, you get a preferential tax rate. And the actual rate itself depends on what your filing status is and how much money you're making for that year, because there's three different federal brackets, and states are going to have their own thing. But there's either the 0% bracket, the 15% bracket, or the 20% bracket. But also, if you make over 250 grand just overall, then you're going to be in the net investment income tax, which is one of the taxes that was created with Obamacare for punishing high income people. And so that's an extra 3.8% tax on top of that. So basically, your federal long-term capital gains rate can vary from 0% up to 23.8%. And so that's already a preferential treatment. And same thing happens with qualified dividends and other things. But so that's where we are now. That's where we've been for decades. Um, if you have a loss, I actually was looking this up. I was talking on the Navigators call yesterday, which is um, our premium group, where there's a $3,000 per year loss limitation on capital losses. And so if you lose 100 grand in a year, which I did many years ago, you can take $3,000 a year, and the remainder rolls over for the next, however many years, up until either the loss is used up or until you have an offsetting gain. And that $3,000 limit was basically created in 1954, and it was never indexed for inflation. So 3,000 in 1954 was a significant loss. 3,000 in 2026, not that significant of a loss, just because of inflation has eroded the value of the money supply, and the average income relative to that 3,000 has grown dramatically. So, but what about gains, right? Same thing happens in the reverse. So I really got radicalized on this topic a couple of years ago when I had a client. She had bought a house in California, many years ago, and the value of the real estate went up, and she sold it, and she ended up paying about 30 grand worth of taxes. And I was just curious because, she'd held it for such a long time. And, the market's been up and down in between then. It was, bought in kind of in the highs before the financial crash of '08. And so I just, as an exercise, I just went to the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they have an inflation calculator, which is based on the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Now, there are many measures of inflation. There's a lot of debate over what's the real inflation rate, but CPI is widely accessible at the very least. I would argue it's understated, but it's used for a lot of official government type stuff. So I used that calculator and I put in her purchase price, and then I put in the year that she bought it, and then you can put in the destination date, and it does an inflation adjustment. It says, okay, well, this amount of money back then is to get the same purchasing power, it would now have to be this higher amount. And when I compare that number to the sale price, basically there was no gain. And so she ended up having to pay long-term capital gains tax, which is, preferential, quote unquote, but it was on a fictitious amount because the purchasing power of that dollar was eroded away. And so you're being taxed on previous dollars, but in current year dollars. And that mismatch in the purchasing power is actually extremely regressive. You might be paying an infinite tax rate because if you have no gain, then you shouldn't be paying taxes at all. Any dollar one of tax is then an injustice basically, and so that happened several years ago at this point, and that really got me charged up about it. And obviously, they don't consult me for my legislative opinions, but I've been talking about it ever since. So I was curious to see this story pop up again. And basically, there's a bill in the Senate. It's Senate Bill 798, which is I forget what the title of it was, but it's the Capital Gains Inflation Relief Act of 2025. And it's being pushed by Ted Cruz along with there was another co-author. But basically what they want to use is the GDP price deflator, where when the real GDP is reported by government sources, they say, okay, well, the economy grew X dollars, but we do a deflator adjustment, and that's supposed to take out the inflation. Again, you can argue as to whether that deflator is the right number or not, but it is a number that can be referenced. So, um, so why are they doing this fundamentally? And the reason why is because of this chart right here. So this is the polymarket chart for the balance of power in the 2026 midterms. So if you've been living under a rock, you might not be aware the Republicans are losing support rapidly. And, so this is charting a couple different outcomes. We're having an election in November of this year, and that's, the president is not up for election, but the House is up for election fully, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for election. And so right now we have we have a Republican controlled executive in the presidency. We have a Republican controlled House, and we have a bare Republican edge in the Senate. And so, in theory, Republicans are controlling both houses and the presidency, and therefore they can enact their legislative agenda as they see fit, assuming everybody in the party plays ball, which obviously is not real life, but it's theoretically the way to assess these things. We can be pretty confident that if the Democrats get either control of the House, the control of the Senate, or both, then they are going to be a thorn in the side of President Trump and will actively try to thwart his legislative agenda. So if the Democrats control either of the houses in 2027 and 2028, the chances that Trump gets something passed in a favorable Republican fashion is very, very low. So effectively, that would create a lame duck presidency. So Polymarket, among others, they keep markets for these kinds of things as far as the outcomes go. And so we've got Democrats sweep, meaning that they get both the House and the Senate, trading at 48.5% probability right now. Republicans keep the Senate, Democrats take the House at 38.5. So combined, that's basically 85%. And Republicans sweep, which would mean retaining the control of both houses, is at 14.5%. And the others, I don't know what other other would be, because I think this is the four chances. I guess if there was a deadlock kind of um, situation, I suppose that would be other. So these are basically under 1%. So just rounding off, 15% chance, according to the current estimations of people placing bets on Polymarket, are saying Republicans keep control, and 85% chance says that they don't. So, um, Republicans are panicking. And this debate is reigniting because if this were to pass here in the next couple of months, then that would theoretically be a point of support for Republicans because they're passing tax relief. And this is, I'm basically in favor of any legislation that reduces taxes. I can imagine there might be some exceptions to that if something were to impose some draconian other thing. But in general, I'm all for indexing cost basis for inflation because inflation is basically the government stealing. They're stealing not dollars from you, but they're stealing the purchasing power of the dollars that you hold, which is why saving no longer works. So you cannot save your way to retirement. And what you have to do instead is you have to become an investor, whether or not you're a good investor. Because if you're not participating in basically what is effectively business operational upside, then whatever amount you save becomes worthless over time. And so imagine you're a 25-year-old and you saved 20% of your income. So I think the median income for a W-2 job this year, you know, last year is about $54,000. Um, so let's just say you make that and you save 20%. So that's $12,000, approximately. I know I'm rounding up there, but I save $12,000 when I'm 25. How much does that $12,000 turn into if I saved it? Well, if I'm just saving, that turns into $12,000, right? Because that money is kept in my mattress or whatever, and it's just sitting there doing nothing. And the value of $12,000 in 40 years at my theoretical retirement age of 65 is going to be much less than $12,000 today. That's why savings is impossible as a long-term wealth accumulation strategy. So, just imagine, so, I mean, it's 2026. 40 years ago was 1986. I was alive in 1986, and I can tell you, things cost a lot less in like nominal dollar amounts. I remember being at my neighborhood pool, and they had a soda machine, and I could buy stuff for, I don't know, 25 cents or 50 cents, whatever it was. And now the same machines cost more. And yeah, you can go to Walmart and find one that's cheap, but in general, this was not a special, soda machine. It was just one that was, stocked by whatever distributor that they had. And so, that same thing is, $2, 2.50 maybe, depending on where you are. If you're in the airport, it's $5. So the value of that 50 cents has been eroded by a factor of four, basically. And so if I save 20,000 or I save $12,000 when I'm 25, that becomes the value of $3,000 when I'm 65, assuming that same rate, continues. And inflation is a moving target, so it's very hard to say. But I have looked at this many times over the years, and basically, if you go back to the 1950s and chart the expansion of the money supply over that period of time, it averages out about 6.5%. And so for me, when I'm looking at inflation, that's the kind of number that I'm looking at as far as long-term averages. If you ask the government, they'll say less. They'll say 4%-ish, and recently 2.5%. But we all have our different incentives as far as how we interpret the data. So um, all that is as it may be, but if this were to pass, then that would be a huge benefit for holding assets over the long term. And so if I'm that 25-year-old, instead of saving 25 or saving $12,000, which I know is going to get eroded away by inflation, I invest that $12,000 into, I could do it inside of a retirement account, or I could do it outside of a retirement account and buy into stocks or real estate or any kind of other asset class. It could be Bitcoin, it could be precious metals, it could be, I support my friend who's starting a new business and I'm taking an equity piece, or I'm lending money for real estate, like any number of things that can be done using capital to make more money. And that turns you into an investor over time. Now, in order to reduce the disincentive to invest, so you can't hold the savings because inflation erodes your money away. If you do invest, then the question becomes, well, what happens then? Assuming the investment is successful, which, there are no guarantees, um, then if you then realize a gain, you're then going to pay taxes on it, right? So the capital gains tax, even though it's preferential, it's still a disincentive to invest. And the retirement problem that exists in America and other places in the world too, is that the current capital structure does not support the current population structure. So said another way, Social Security is going broke and rapidly. So we have, as of the last estimate, about 6 years before benefits have to be cut. And my estimation is that benefits won't be cut, and instead taxes will go up, inflation will go up, and basically the difference in the benefit will just be printed one way or another. So that's just an estimate, but all of this is kind of a piece. This is all trying to get Americans to uh, support their own retirement as much as possible. And this is one way to do it. So also, it saves my clients and anybody else who holds, in this particular proposal, you'd have to hold an asset for at least 3 years to get this indexing function to activate on your sale. But I think it would be a great move forward. So, um, will that move this poll? I don't think so. Personally, that's my political estimation, but it might help a little bit, but it's not gonna overturn an 85% chance. Maybe it brings it from 85 down to 75, maybe. Uh, I don't think people are really that moved by tax policy um, for political voting. I think they do have uh, they do have sentiment responses based on the eventual economy after the tax policy goes into effect, but it's not like, oh, they passed this law that I like, and therefore, this tax policy law, and therefore I'm going to vote Republican or I'm going to vote Democrat. I don't think that's as much of a direct relationship. So yeah, so we might see a couple point pickup in the Republican sweep if this were to pass, but I still think chances are we have a Democrat blockade in the 2027 and 2028 years for the executive. So all of that, I guess, was preamble, because what I decided to do is I decided to make a tool, and I'm calling it Tax Align AI, and you can go to this at gains.hiddentaxcost.com. It's a free tool, and what it does is it calculates the inflation for any particular numbers you put in. So I'll just put that in the chat there, and I'll show you how it works. It's very simple. So how much did inflation steal from you? Reveal my gain. So it asks you, what did you originally pay for this asset? So let's just say, 100 grand. Say it was a house or something. And then what year did you acquire? Let's say I bought it in 2006. And what year are you selling? 2026 is now, obviously. And what is it worth today? So let's say today the thing is worth 350,000. And assuming that I would sell it for that amount. And how do you file your taxes? Because the brackets of the long-term capital gains rates differ depending on what your filing status is. Let's just say I'm single. And what is your estimated annual income, not counting this asset sale? So what else do you have? So let's say I'm making, what did I say earlier? 54,000 was the average or median W-2. So AI is analyzing the situation, and it is going to come back with a report. But again, no sign up, totally free. Go go nuts. Use it as many times as you want. And there's an explanation breakdown here, but then the summary chart, the results at a glance. Nominal gain. Oh, my head is in the way here. Let me change to this. There we go. Nominal gain, $250,000. That's going from 100 to 350. The inflation multiplier using the BLS CPI is 1.64. Now, is that going to be exactly the same as the GDP deflator? No, but it's going to be close. Um, so the real gain is 185,000. So the phantom gain that was due to the erosion of the purchasing power of that 100,000 is $64,160, which means that if I sold this today under current tax law, I'd be paying, you know, 20% or whatever it is, on $64,000 that was already taken from me. So for at least that portion, that is basically increasing my effective tax, if that makes sense. And so under current law, I'd pay 37.5 on that gain. Under Senate 798, which is, the proposal that's in Congress right now, I'd pay 27,000. And that tax savings is $9,624. So that would be the benefit to me if that were my scenario and this law were to pass. And you can email yourself the results, um, and it'll send the summary, and it'll also send some capital gains strategies like Section 121, Section 1031, deferred sales trust. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do to potentially mitigate your capital gains issues. And obviously, if you do choose to email yourself the results, I also get a copy of your email address, and I will welcome you to the Tax Sherpa ecosystem. So, um, I think this is a really powerful view on the reality of the situation because effectively, if I'm going to pay 37.5 in taxes and I lost $64,000 worth of purchasing power, the net result is, I lost 100 grand in real value because I lost the purchasing power of 64 and I'm paying an extra $37,000 this year. And so the net harm to my financial position is the sum of those two things. So, yes, I made money on this deal, right? Theoretically I made 250, but really I'm only making 150 after all is said and done. So, when we do our financial modeling as far as like how much money did I make on this, you really have to keep that in mind as far as what is my nominal gain, what is my after tax gain, and what is my real gain, inflation adjusted after taxes. And that's going to be the phantom gain and the tax subtracted from the nominal gain. So that tool is available, like I said, free to everybody, gains.hiddentaxcost.com, and go nuts. Uh, so that's story number one. Story number two was this thing that was signed yesterday. So this is an executive order that Trump signed promoting retirement savings access for American workers by establishing TrumpIRA.gov. Now, I already checked. This site does not work yet. Uh, so I'll just kind of summarize what we have here. Presidents love executive orders because they don't have to run it by Congress or anything. But basically, he's saying that tens of millions of Americans lack access to employer-sponsored retirement plans. That is true. Workers in small businesses, part-time, independent contractors, self-employed face unnecessary barriers for saving for retirement. That is also true. The way the retirement programs are structured is that the most efficient one to use is a 401k or a 403b. So 401k is for a regular profit corporation, 403b is for a nonprofit. So if you're a nurse or a firefighter or something, you probably have a 403b. There's also 457 plans that are not used as much, but the reason the 401k is the most efficient retirement structure is because you can contribute both as the employee and the employer can do matching contributions. Now, if you're one of many in a corporation, your match is probably not going to be all that great. If there's any, it might be 2%, 3%, 5%, something like that. If you are, um, if you are your own employer and you have your own business, it could be 25%, and it can be dramatically leveraged to do that. So, but if you're one of these other people, workers in small businesses, your employer might not have the plan at all. If you're part-time, you might not be eligible. If you're an independent contractor, well, you're not an employee, so you're not eligible for that type of plan at all. And so, there is definitely an element of the access that they're trying to address here. And it goes on to say, my administration intends to give these often left out American workers access to the same type of retirement savings opportunities offered to every federal worker and to establish an easy and transparent way for eligible workers to obtain up to a $1,000 match for their savings. Um, and so it is the policy of the United States to promote a high quality, low cost individual retirement accounts, IRAs, offered by private sector financial institutions that meet objective standards of cost transparency and fiduciary responsibility. And so there was a law passed a few years ago called the Secure 2.0 Act. It was part of the kind of like one of those omnibus packages, um, Public Law 117-328 Division T. And that did a bunch of things. So one of the things it did was if you inherit a IRA, like somebody passes away, you're a beneficiary for that, then you inherit and then you have to start withdrawing and withdraw it over 10 years. After the Secure 2.0 Act was passed, it wasn't clear if you could wait to the end of that 10 years and just withdraw it all at once, or if you had to do it periodically over the lifetime of that 10 years. And we got an answer, I don't know, 2 years ago now, saying that you got to take it out every year. You could take out more up front, but you have to do at least the minimum each year of those 10 years, so that by the end of the 10 years, the account is drawn down to zero. Because when you withdraw from a traditional IRA or 401k or whatever, you are paying taxes. That is an income tax event because when you put the money in originally, you got a deduction. And so that's the balancing of those particular scales across time. And so usually it's a parent passes away, they got tax deductions throughout their working life when they were putting those contributions into the plan. They passed away, you inherit, and now you are paying income tax on the tax break that they got. So it's a little bit odd in that way because you're not the one who got the tax break originally, but you are still liable for the taxes when you withdraw that money now. So, um, so this is all like introductory stuff. Section 2 of the executive order talks about establishment of TrumpIRA.gov. So the Secretary of the Treasury shall, by January 1, 2027, establish website TrumpIRA.gov, which I'm sure will be renamed in the next administration because just like Trump got rid of official references to Obamacare, we still call it Obamacare. I still call it Obamacare. But if you ask anybody who works for the government, they will not call it Obamacare because back in Trump's first term, that was made official policy that we're not going to call it this way. Um, but they're going to establish a website that provides individuals with a particular focus on independent contractors, self-employed individuals, and other workers who do not have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan with information about high-quality, low-cost IRAs. Individuals who contribute to qualifying IRAs and who are otherwise eligible are entitled to a federal savers match contribution of up to $1,000 pursuant to 26 U.S.C. 6433. So the Secure 2.0 Act created this where up until now, there's been a saver's credit. So if you are a low income person, and there's a couple qualifications as to what that means, and you contribute to a qualifying retirement plan like an IRA or a 401k or whatever, then you got a non-refundable tax credit on your tax return, which was helpful theoretically. The problem with it is that the people who qualify because they're low income don't have much tax liability in the first place. By the time you throw in maybe a child with a child tax credit and you have the standard deduction, which was expanded by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and made permanent by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, then the tax liability for those people in those situations was very low. So if they also then contributed to a retirement plan, yeah, they got the tax credit, but it didn't really help, right? So a non-refundable tax credit, which the savers credit is and was, is means that it reduces the amount of taxes that you owe. And if you don't owe any, then it doesn't do anything. And that's kind of the problem. So the Savers 2.0, or sorry, the Secure 2.0 Act fixed that, fixed quote unquote, um, addressed it by starting in 2027 removing the tax credit, and instead they're going to kick in money straight into your retirement account as a match, and it's a 50% match up to a $1,000 contribution. So if you put in 2 grand and you're a qualifying person, then the government will kick in $1,000, which is neat. Uh, so, what this executive order is doing is, well, it's creating this website and creating a kind of menu of programs that people can contribute to, theoretically more easily than going to their broker, which they may or may not have, and setting up an IRA. So, that's the new mechanism that is going into effect in 2027 and is being expanded by this executive order as far as who can qualify for these potential contributions. The difficult part is that the federal savers match contribution is sent directly to the financial manager, the administrator of whatever that account is. So somehow we're going to have to report what account that is so that they can put that money to work, which is yet another piece of data that just adds to the complexity of tax returns. So is what it is. Um, but TrumpIRA.gov is going to identify institutions that offer IRAs that provide a menu of investment options that meet stated criteria, including investment fund products or model portfolios, including life cycle or targeted retirement date options. Debatable how well those work. Funds that are designed to protect principal on an ongoing basis. Uh, Usually that means lower gains because if you're protecting principal, you're going to be have a more conservative allocation. Maintain low administrative costs with overall net expense ratios, including of operating costs, management fees, and administrative expenses limited to 0.15%, and do not impose minimum contribution or balance requirements. So the thing about fees is that I was talking about this with my team earlier today, and you know, it's debatable how much the retirement system is structured for the American person trying to invest for retirement versus Wall Street. There's definitely an argument to be had because the accounts have all these different fees at the account level, and then given the menu of investment products, um, inside of those products, there are additional fees, which are oftentimes very, very difficult to discern. So, uh, basically, Wall Street is doing very, very well. I don't know if you've noticed that or not, but ever since 1973 and the ERISA Act that it created all this stuff, they've done very well in terms of siphoning fees out of working Americans. And there's this language here that is to reduce or maintain low administrative costs, which is, I think, better than nothing. But it is debatable how well that actually works when you factor in the fees inside of the investment products as well, and the categorization of things and all the usual legal mumbo jumbo games that people like to play when available to them. And the people who work on Wall Street have very good lawyers. So it's like I said, it's debatable. At the moment, I would say, investing is better than not investing. And even though there is this fee load, if the choice is between investing and not investing, do the investment. Like I said, saving for retirement is functionally impossible. So instead, what we need to do is we need to invest for retirement. And if either you need to manage that all yourself, in which case you could do it with no fees, or you need to pay somebody somehow in order to invest on your behalf. And like these target model portfolios and all this kind of thing, that's somebody else doing the work effectively. Now, you could just go to any big brokerage house, open an IRA, and control all your investment decisions yourself, and you'll be paying very minimal fees. There's the brokerages like Robinhood where they sell your order, so you get a slightly worse price when you buy something. But it's fractions of a cent basically, or maybe 1 cent. And so on the individual level, it doesn't really feel that bad. But when you aggregate it across the entire user base, then it adds up to a significant amount of money the for the uh, for the brokerage firms and the hedge funds that facilitate that. So, you know, you're paying somebody somehow, some way, unless you're doing it all yourself. And, this kind of language is helpful. I'm not personally convinced how effective it ends up being overall, but we'll see. Um, so Section 3 of this executive order Secretary of the Treasury shall take all necessary steps as appropriate and consistent with applicable law to ensure that qualifying individuals who contribute to IRAs, including those who open IRAs listed on TrumpIRA.gov and otherwise satisfy all applicable requirements, receive the federal Savers Match contribution. And that's also is true if you are working for a charitable class organization, and it's also true, on and on. General legalese that go down from there. So basically, the executive order here is just trying to expand access to the Savers match that is going into effect in 2027. So I don't see any reason that this should be, challenged. Trump gets sued a lot by different political actors, and I think this is one that they will kind of leave alone. That's my guess. But starting in 2027, definitely look out for the Savers Match program. And if you are one of those qualifying people, which is basically going to be 35,000 and under, you know, approximately, you got to be at least 18. You got to be not in school. So if you're 20 but a full-time student, then that doesn't count. If you're a dependent, that doesn't count. But if you are an independent person living on your own, at least for tax purposes, then and you contribute to retirement and your income is in certain ranges, then you can get up to $1,000 from the government kicked straight into your retirement account. So this is part of the larger package of retirement type options, like the Trump accounts, the Section 530 accounts that are going into effect here in about 2 months, January or July 5th, 2026. Those will start to become a thing, and those are for children under 18, and people can contribute up to $5,000 a year towards those. And then at age 18, they kind of convert to a quasi IRA. It's sort of a blend between 529 plans and IRAs. They could also be used for first-time home purchase and acquiring a business, which is, I think, is the most interesting use case. But we'll see how that all shakes out. Um, Incidentally, if you own your own business and you want to make use of Trump accounts as an employer, you can offer an employee benefit of up to $2,500 towards an employee's Trump account or an employee's dependent's Trump account. So, if you're a small business owner, then that can be a great way to capture a deduction at the business level and set your kid or your employee's kids up for future success. So, um, that can be great, and that's on top of like family management company structures where the kids might be on payroll anyways, as long as they are working for the business. But lots of lots of tax planning opportunities in those cases. So those are the two things I wanted to go over today and this week. So one is Republicans are panicked. They're talking about inflation indexing cost basis. And so go and use the gains.hiddencost.com, hiddentaxcost.com. And you could use that tool. Like I said, free, no sign up, no nothing. Um, and the other thing is this executive order on the Savers match, which is expanding access, and that starts in 2027. All right. My tea is it's still a little bit warm, but it's definitely losing some heat. So that's my cue to wrap it up here, and we will do this all again in a week on Friday at noon Eastern, and I'll see you guys then.